There is a quiet shift happening in cat breeding. It is rarely acknowledged openly, but once you start looking closely, it becomes difficult not to see it. You notice it in conversations at shows, in private messages between breeders and buyers, and in a simple question that appears more and more often: do you have something unusual? Breeds are no longer changing only because of selection, knowledge, or long-term vision. They are changing because of demand. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually, through many small decisions that seem harmless on their own, yet together begin to push a breed in a new direction.
For most of the history of organized breeding, change was slow, and more importantly, it was intentional. Breeders worked within a framework defined by standards, by type, and by a long-term understanding of what a breed should remain. That framework still exists, but it no longer acts alone. There is now another force shaping decisions: the market. Social media visibility, buyer expectations, trends, and the simple fact that something new is easier to sell than something familiar. And unlike standards, the market does not reward consistency, it rewards novelty.
This shift does not begin with a dramatic decision. No one sits down and decides to redesign a breed. It happens in much smaller choices. An unusual color is kept instead of excluded. A rare expression is explored instead of questioned. A combination that attracts attention is repeated because it generates interest. Over time, these choices begin to create their own logic. What starts as an exception becomes an option. What is an option becomes desirable. And what is desirable slowly begins to feel normal, not because it was carefully evaluated and accepted, but because it was seen often enough to stop feeling unusual.
We can already see this pattern across multiple breeds. New color expressions are promoted, new terms appear, not as established genetic realities, but as marketing language. Mutations become features, features become selling points, and selling points begin to shape direction. Individually, each example can be explained. That is precisely what makes the shift so easy to underestimate, because the problem is rarely one color, one mutation, or one combination on its own. The problem is the logic behind repeated selection, not what belongs to the breed, but what attracts attention most effectively.
That is where the real change begins. The central question is no longer only, does this belong to the breed? It is increasingly replaced by another one: will this attract attention? That is a very different criterion. Because attention does not require long-term thinking, it does not require structural stability, and it does not require respect for the original concept of the breed. It only requires demand. And once demand becomes the main filter, identity begins to lose its position.
The consequences are not immediate. Identity does not disappear overnight, it becomes flexible, then negotiable, and eventually secondary. At the same time, buyers are not outside this process. They help shape it. When the market consistently rewards what is described as rare, exclusive, or never seen before, breeders respond. And when shortcuts appear, such as requests for kittens without papers, the structure itself begins to weaken. What looks like a practical compromise in one litter becomes a systemic risk across generations. Pedigree tracking becomes incomplete, selection loses structure, and the breed remains the same in name, while what it represents becomes far less clear. What makes this process especially dangerous is that it does not feel like a decision. There is no official declaration, no formal vote, no single moment when someone says, "This is where the breed is going," and yet over time, that is exactly what happens. A system can change completely without ever deciding to change, simply by following what is easiest, most visible, and most immediately rewarded. So the real question is not whether change will happen. It will. The real question is whether we are still developing breeds or redesigning them, slowly, collectively, and without ever admitting it. And if the direction is no longer guided by what a breed is, but by what the market wants it to become, who exactly is in control?